forward to our session today. It's been a while actually since I've been able to co-host one of our Women in Leadership for Finance webinars. And I have to say, it's really great to be back, and it's really great to see you all and to have such a brilliant session lined up. So as I always try to do, I will try and keep my introduction as brief as possible so that we can get on to the questions and the conversation. But I did just want to spend a minute or two updating you on a couple of things that have happened since we last met. And specifically a bit of an overview from the responses that we've received to the questionnaire that we launched earlier this year. So since we last met, we've launched our Women in Leadership for Finance network, so a vehicle to keep in touch between our webinars. And the first publication, which was sent out last week, included an overview of the outputs from the network members' questionnaire and survey. So the aim of the survey was to get your input, so to get your input onto how we take the network forward, to understand the things that are important to you, and to understand the people that you want to hear from as part of the webinar sessions. So we received a really brilliant response, and thank you so much for everyone who responded to the questions that we posed, and to give us such really rich and valuable feedback. So to summarise your responses, of which we had 97, we received thoughts on what people want to see from the network, and some of those highlights include hearing more stories from inspirational leaders, enjoying the solidarity that the group has and the opportunity to network and have time away from a desk, so a bit of a break at the end of the working day. You'd like to hear...
Can I call you back? Okay. Thanks, bye.
You'd like to hear more from more of networking, and we'll link that through to an in-person event in a minute. You'd like to hear more inspirational stories, and you'd like to understand the opportunities that are out there for mentoring and coaching. You still, as a group, feel that the main barriers to female career progression are self-confidence, trying to fit a specific mould of what a leadership style is, and managing childcare or other caring responsibilities of flexible working. We also asked you, as I just mentioned, if you'd be interested in an in-person event, and an overwhelming 91% of those who answered said yes. The preference was London as first preference, and then Manchester second. So we're currently working through the logistics of this, but it looks like early to mid-July, and London as a venue is probably the best option for that. So we'll definitely be getting back to you with some confirmation around that as soon as we can. We also received loads of ideas about future webinars and what they could feature and focus on. So a couple of those ideas are middle management and more junior members of the team as part of the webinars, leading and embracing change, best practice in supporting women and involving some of our male colleagues in that, managing workload and women's health. And some specific suggestions for speakers included Amanda Pritchard, Ruth May and Caroline Clark. And then some more general feedback was a significant gratitude for the network and encouragement for these webinars to continue. So very clear response that many of the network enjoy these sessions and get a lot out of them, which was great to hear. We also had some really constructive feedback, including suggestions to change the time from 5 p.m. And I know we've discussed that before as part of the webinar. And one of the other developments since we last met was the creation of our LinkedIn group. So it's via that LinkedIn group that we've asked for votes about what the best time for these webinars would be. So if you haven't linked in to that group and you haven't voted, please do so, because your feedback on that is really helpful. We want to make sure that we get this at the right time. Right, so enough about survey feedback. You can read the detail in the newsletter that was sent out. But back to today's webinar, and very closely linked to some of this feedback that I've just talked through, we're posing the question, does a CFO need to fit a certain mould? So for this webinar, we're focusing specifically on a CFO position as an aspirational role, but really it could cover any role within finance. We are joined by two really impressive and inspirational leaders today. So Virginia Massaro, CFO of Chelsea and Westminster NHS Trust, and Sarah Brampton, CFO and Deputy CEO at University Hospitals Plymouth. So thank you both for joining us. In a minute, I'll ask you both to introduce yourselves and just give a bit of background to open up the conversation. And then we'll open up to the network for questions. And as always, please do get involved. Please ask questions. Could everyone go on mute, please? Thank you. Please do ask questions either using the chat function or raising your hand, and between Nicola and I will bring you into the conversation. Just in terms of logistics for this evening, so as ever, we're meeting virtually. So to ensure that everyone can see and hear, please do put yourself on mute and turn your camera off. Unless you're asking a question, then please turn your camera on and turn mute off. And as always, please make the most of the time we've got today. We'll go really quickly. Please engage. Please ask the questions that you want to ask. Meet new people, network. As ever, this is your time as a network, so please treat it as safe, open and inclusive. So without further introduction or ado, Sarah, can I come to you and just ask you to introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. So my name's Sarah Brampton, and I am, as Zoe said, CFO at Plymouth Hospital, with a lovely building you can see behind me. And I've been here for 4 years. So my career history to date is very dull, I'm afraid. So I joined the graduate training scheme in '96 and steadily worked my way up. I've been really lucky, actually. I've been based in the southwest for all that time, and I've sort of had a range of jobs ranging from health authority, community trust, mental health partnership trust, and spent a lot of my career in the acute sector, which is where I am now. I turned 50 this year, which I'm really proud of. It's great being 50, and I had 2 children along the way. So my daughter was born in 2003 and my son in 2005. So they're just, one's at university and one's about to sit his A levels. So that's me, and I guess just reflecting on my career and the family. So I always mention my children when I talk about my career today, because they are an integral part of who I am and where I am and why I'm here. And I've been really clear in my objectives all the way through that I didn't want to move my kids around schools. So as I say, I have been lucky in the NHS. It has really supported me to develop my career and enable my kids to stay in the same school. So that's me, and that's where I am.
Brilliant, thank you, Sarah. Virginia, can I come to you?
Yeah, thanks, and hi everyone. It's really interesting to be on this side of one of these webinars, and I've heard a lot of them, so thank you very much for having me. So yeah, my name's Virginia. I'm the CFO at Chelsea and Westminster in London. In terms of my career history, I was also on the NHS graduate scheme, same as Sarah, in North West London. So I was based in Hillingdon at the beginning of my training. I then worked in Ealing Hospital, and I've been at Chelsea and Westminster since 2010. So I've been here a long time, not in this role, in a number of different roles. So I only really had I've only really worked in 3 different NHS organisations since I've been in the NHS, which is a bit unusual as well, and all in a really small geographical area within North West London. I also grew up in North West London, and I still live in North West London. So obviously I haven't moved very far from where I started. I don't have any children, so I don't have the same experience as Sarah. So probably get quite a good different opinion from, not different opinion, but different career story and life story. But like I said, I live and work, and I grew up in the same area that I'm in, and I think for me that's quite important, because it's also, I've worked in hospitals and organisations that my family have attended and been in and been patients of. So I think that's also quite helpful for me to feel part of the community that the hospital serves.
Thank you. So I'll kick off with asking some questions, but we do want to encourage some questions from the audience as well. So please raise your hands or type in the chat function if you have something you want to ask. I've had the benefit of knowing both Virginia and Sarah for quite a long time, so know some of the backstory and some of their answers. But I think it's important they share some of these things with you. So if I start with you, Virginia, and when you were starting out in your career, earlier on in your career, what role model, or what was the model of CFO that you were looking up to and that you were inspired by? And how did that person or those people differ from your own personal style?
Thanks, Nicola. So I think when in the beginning of my NHS career, as probably is the beginning of quite a lot of people's, we most of the CFOs I had any interaction with were male and white, and probably not that that's changed that much. We'll probably come on to that. And you know, as a junior person starting and knowing not a lot about the NHS when I first started, seemed quite, I guess, stern and serious, I would say. It's a which I reflect now and probably appear that way to junior people in my team, so I have to think about that one. So yeah, I think I'm not that approachable, I would say, and but that is partly because I felt very junior and probably intimidated. I think in terms of role models, and I've been really lucky to work with at Chelsea and Westminster a couple of female CFOs. In fact, since I've been working here, we've had female CFOs, in which is really unusual. And both very different, the two CFOs I worked under, but they were really inspirational. And probably one that people will know quite well was Sandra Easton, who was went on to work in the national team with Julian Kelly. And she really supported me in stepping into this role after she left. But also really being quite tenacious, tough, take no prisoners type of person. And I think that was really inspirational to see her, you know, standing up to people that I would have been intimidated by in her place. So yeah, I think probably quite the range, but I have been very fortunate to work with two very inspiring female CFOs.
Thank you. And just sort of delving a bit deeper into that, it's quite interesting what you said there about stern and serious. And at the beginning, when I asked the question about what is the attribute that a CFO must have, no one said that, funnily enough. But how did, when you were looking up at these role models and, you know, using Sandra as an example, did you think, oh, that's fine, I'm like that too, or was it, or not?
No way. So I very much not stern or serious, and definitely not intimidating. So I think and that's partly why I never actually wanted to be a CFO. I've kind of said that quite openly quite a few times. I'm glad I'm doing it now, just not trying to get rid of my job, but because I very much didn't see myself as that sort of person, and I'm not the sort of person that's going to go around shouting at people. Like I said, I'm not really very stern or serious, and I think that quite often is the perception of what people think they need to be a CFO, and especially Sandra being a very strong personality, and a very my personality is very different from her. So just having a female CFO doesn't mean all female CFOs have to do that role in the same way. I'm very different from her, and I think actually in a way that intimidated me slightly, to say, well, that's what I need to be a female CFO of Chelsea and Westminster, and therefore I can't do that. I can't be a different person. I'm not going to have a personality transplant, so I can't do that. It took me quite a long time, and her quite a lot of persuading of me actually to act up into the role when she was leaving. And it's taken me quite a long time even doing the job to make me realise that I can do it in my way, not in anyone else's way.
And so just to, I know Jenny's got her hand up, so I'm going to come to her in a minute, but I want to continue on from what you've been saying there because it's quite important. And what was it about your personality or your style that you felt didn't quite fit those expectations? And I know perhaps they weren't everyone else's expectations, but I think for you, they were your expectations, weren't they? And of what you could see was successful in that role.
Yeah, so Nicola and I were chatting about this the other day, but one of the things I did with my team when I was a while ago was looking at, I don't know if anyone's heard of insights, but it's a bit like a Myers-Briggs type thing. And I did it with my team, and I was on my own in a little segment, and then everyone else was mostly in the same segment, and a few scattering as other people, and I was in the kind of more feeling side of things, and almost polar opposite to the rest of my team. And it was really a light bulb moment and said, oh, I'm a bit different to everyone else here, and I hadn't quite properly twigged. And And not to say that Sandra wasn't feeling that, so I've realised I've not started that in a good way, but had a slightly different personality trait. I think, but actually that had its own benefits and its own attributes, and I use it to my advantage, because you know, I use it to engage with people. I use it, I think one of the things that people have said is around not being open, being approachable. And I think people have definitely said that to me, that I'm approachable. And I think that's really, really important attribute as a CFO. Well, I think it's important to me. I don't want people to be scared of me or intimidated or to hide things away from me. I think it's really, really important that people feel able to pick up the phone or come and speak to me about things. And I think that's one of the things that I choose to use to my advantage rather than a disadvantage.
Thank you. That's excellent. I think we'll come back to that in a while. That issue around feelings and the insights the insights that insight give you. You've got your hand up, Jenny. Do you want to ask a question? I don't know if you still got your hand up. Hello.
Yeah, hi. I was going to ask a question, but it might have already been answered. We've been asked what we think the attributes are of a CFO, but what do you think they are, and has that changed since you've become a CFO? Because I think perception might change once you're in the seat, so to speak. But really insightful so far. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jenny.
Nicola actually asked Sarah and I this question. Well, actually, Zoe asked Sarah and I this question before you all joined, and I really had to think for a while. So my answer at the time, and I'll stick with my original thought, was around openness and approachability. So actually that's why I kind of made that point. But I really agree with a lot of what people said, and I think integrity is coming through really strongly from the chat, and I completely agree with that. In terms of has it changed? Yeah, it definitely has. I think I thought one of the attributes that had to be was really tough. Actually, I would say that was probably one of the things I thought you had to be. And that's not to say that you don't, because it is, it's a tough job and you do have to be resilient. But I wouldn't have said that is the most important attribute anymore.
Sarah, what do you think? And
yeah,
in answer to that question,
I would agree. I put courage in the chat, but when you asked me before the meeting started, I talked about not being afraid to fail. And I think that's changed since I've become a CFO. So like you, Virginia, I was very sort of, right, that's it. When you become a CFO, you've got to be tough and stern and impeccable in everything you do. But I think actually showing that you're vulnerable, showing that you've got emotions and you're not afraid to show them at work, and that you've got values that you're prepared to stick to, are much more important than the sternness. So yeah, and it does take courage to do that.
Thanks. And was that always your experience, Sarah, when you were at the earlier part of your career, the grad scheme, then coming into your first role, looking up at what the potential career path was and what a CFO looked like or acted like? What did that look like for you, and where did you fit in against that perception?
Yeah, so I similar to Virginia, really. So there did tend to be mainly white males when I was coming up through the ranks, although there was some very inspirational female leaders, not just in finance, but chief executives, which definitely inspired and encouraged me on. But then so did the men, actually. So the male CFOs were very supportive in my career development, but it was that perception that you needed to be stern, you needed to work long hours, you needed to be very tough, and to my shame, I did try to mirror that. So one of the bits of advice I give to people that I mentor at the moment is, don't feel, just because you're stepping up and taking on more responsibility does not mean you've got to work longer hours. And I guess that's one of my regrets, is that I did put family on the back foot whilst I pursued my career, and then you don't have to choose. And I do feel really strongly about that. You shouldn't be made to choose. And what I was doing was trying to mirror male and some female counterparts and seniors that I could see around me, because I thought that's how you got on, and absolutely not showing that I had to rush home and pick the kids up from nursery because that was perceived as a weakness. Now, all of this is in my mind, and I'm not saying people were putting that on me, but I perceive that to be what a CFO did. You know, you could work till 10 o'clock in the office and somebody else could worry about the kids and bath time and stuff. I'm glad to say that's changing a lot. And as I say, I definitely do push against that to the people I mentor, but that was my perception when I was coming up through.
And what was it about, well, what gave you the confidence then to pursue career progression despite your kind of natural personality style not fitting what you saw?
I think it was the job itself and just wanting to do it. You know, just seeing people are around me delivering the sorts of thing that they were delivering and wanting to be part of it. So I think the job in itself, and it's still, you know, it still drives me on, it still excites me. I think these roles are incredibly exciting. You know, these are privileged positions to be in, and that's absolutely what I wanted to do and what keeps me going today. So I think it's that, but it is that balance. You shouldn't have to choose between, do you pursue your career and do you have a you know, a family life outside of work, because you can do both. Being great, you know, being successful in your job and getting promoted doesn't have to mean working 60 hours a week to get there. And that's, yeah, that's my regret.
Yeah, and going back to what you said on that, because actually the findings from the questionnaire we did recently, I think it's maybe 60% or 55 or 60% of people still felt that the one of the greatest barriers to female progression was managing family and other caring responsibilities around that. Did you feel that you felt that you had to act like a man or act like someone who didn't have those responsibilities? Was that coming from you or coming from what you felt others expected of you?
Yeah, I think it was definitely coming from me. You know, even now we go to HFMA conferences, don't we? And there is a bit of an expectation that we're in the bar till 3 a.m. because that's where the networking happens. And you know, I don't think I could do that even when I was in my 20s, but I certainly can't do it now. But you do feel like that is an expectation on you, and it shouldn't be. Networking can happen in all sorts of places, and we shouldn't be trying to mirror our I'm not just saying it's male counterparts, because there's lots of females that are drinking in the bar at 3 a.m. but you know, there's something about making sure you've got those boundaries and your balance is reflective of who you are rather than what you think it should be.
Yeah. Quite an interesting point, because when we started this network, it was all and always has been around women in leadership for finance. Well, actually, it's for every leader, but it's finance specific. Do you think the same issues or challenges exist for non-finance leaders? So for your operational colleagues, for HR, for chief exec as well, or is it specifically something that's more relevant to finance?
I don't think it's just restricted to finance colleagues. I don't know what you think, Virginia, but I suspect it's a very similar position in all exec portfolios, careers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's I think it's very consistent issue. I guess the bit that makes it a bit different with finance is there tends to be, especially in the NHS, it's a very female heavy workforce. There tend to be more role models and it's more representative in senior roles. So even in chief executive roles, it's more representative than in CFOs. But I think some of the same issues and some of the same barriers, self-imposed or otherwise, are absolutely there. I think, you know, the same things that Sarah mentioned around feeling like you can't go home at whatever time to go pick up your kids and you know, go home for bath time. You can tell I don't have kids because I don't even know what you do with them. You know, could you do that as a chief exec when you're expected on a national call at 6 p.m? Could you just say, I'm sorry, I can't? And sometimes it takes courage. I think there is something as well, you know, like I said, I don't have children, but my 2 deputies do, who are both male. And I make sure that they feel able to, you know, it's not just a female thing, actually, it's anyone that has children or any caring responsibilities, or, do you know, anything that they are interested in. It shouldn't have to be necessarily about children. And I make sure they feel able to go home at whatever time, if they need to take an hour off to go for an assembly, whatever it might be. I think it's really important to do that, whether they're male or female. But I think there is something also around work-life balance for people that don't have children. And I mentored someone for a while who didn't have children, and they said the big thing they wanted to do was go and play hockey 1 day a week, and they wanted to leave slightly earlier 1 day a week to go play hockey. And was it possible? And I was like, well, yeah, why should it be okay to go for the same thing for someone else to go pick up their children, that they've got a commitment they want to do 1 day a week? We should support that. So I think there is something about, actually, how do we have the flexibility for people to have a work-life balance, whatever that life might be?
Thanks. No, I agree, and I love the contrast there, actually, of Sarah's experience acting like a man and feeling that you've got to do all these things to fit in, and now when you're in the leadership roles, you're able to reflect back on that and think. And Virginia, you're giving that ownership and flexibility to your team, which is fantastic. Coming back to you, Virginia, actually, what gave you the confidence to allow your natural leadership style to evolve? So even though you knew it wasn't what was expected, it wasn't the role models that you'd seen and experienced, but you went into the role on an acting up basis. But what gave you that confidence to really develop your own style of leadership?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Nicola. So a big part of it is that I couldn't really pretend to be someone else for very long, because you can't really manage that for more than a short period of time before you kind of revert back to your own personality type. So just as a bit of background, so as I said, I started this role as in an acting up capacity, and it was a couple of months before the first wave of COVID. And when I did it, I was really clear that I would only do it for a few months, because as I said before, I didn't want to be a CFO. I really liked being a deputy. I loved the job. I loved having the kind of responsibility for the team, but without having to do all the kind of board stuff. Said I'd do it for a few months. Obviously, first wave of COVID kicked in, and a few months turned into quite a bit longer. And properly thrown into the deep end. So it was a really interesting time to become a CFO. But actually, having the biggest bit that really made me realise it is in the middle of a pandemic and crisis and everything else that was going on. You know, the realization that you can't live in that sort of really stressful environment. You can't be someone else. You can only really be yourself. And actually, I really quite enjoyed it, despite, and it sounds really strange to say, enjoying a horrible crisis, but I quite enjoyed the role. And it really made me realize that I could do it, because I had done it for the last year over a very difficult time. I was capable, but I could also do it as me, not as someone else. I got the results. You know, we managed to, get mostly was involved with buying a lot of PPE, as I'm sure a lot of CFOs were involved with. We managed to, keep the hospital going with PPE, managed to support staff, support teams, and still be me, and actually get, decent results at the back of it. And it was a real kind of, I could do this as me, not as someone else that I want to be, because you're never going to be able to do that. There's still learning, and of course, there's bits that I need to improve on, and that you're always going to learn and develop. And but that was a real realization, and that gave me the confidence to apply for the permanent job. But I have to say, I wouldn't have applied for it if I hadn't had the opportunity to act up first, and I'm really grateful that I got that opportunity to do that, because I wasn't confident to do that without doing that.
Brilliant, thanks, Virginia. I'm just going to pick up a quick question and then we'll come to Louise in the chat. So just because you mentioned a really good example of the question I was going to ask. So you've both talked about being tough as being one of the things that you saw as you were getting into your careers from CFOs. Obviously, as being a CFO, you still have to make tough and difficult business decisions. Do you think having a compassionate leadership style makes those decisions, helps in making those decisions, or makes it more difficult in making those decisions? Sarah, shall I come to you and then go back to Virginia?
Yeah, I definitely think it helps, Zoe. So I think, all of us that work in the NHS do so because we care about the services we're delivering, and otherwise we wouldn't be here, would we? So what makes us all good leaders is those values that we hold. And if you've got a really tough decision to make, I think it is so much easier if you've got your values, you do it with your values at the forefront of that decision making. So always thinking about the outcome for the patient. So what is it that's going to improve that outcome? How can our decision be made to improve that outcome? And I think that that guides you. So Virginia talking about the pandemic, it was almost easier, wasn't it, in that we had a common objective, all of us, commissioners, providers alike, regional office, national office. We were all here to get through the pandemic and keep people safe. And I think that was that was a really easy way of just bringing those values to the forefront. I'm not saying that they're not there now, but I do think having that compassionate leadership makes our jobs, I wouldn't say easy, because it isn't it? There are some really tricky decisions, but I do think it's absolutely you absolutely need to show that compassion as you're making those tough decisions, and they help to justify why you've decided to make that decision.
Thank you. And just kind of leading on from that, because COVID was a specific point where it pulled people together. Just thinking about our current planning and contract negotiation round, we've seen a bit of the opposite to that. What do you think compassionate leadership brings into that conversation?
I think it's sorry, Virginia, just as I've got the floor, but I don't think it's much different in that we all want to improve access times for our patients. We all want to hit the cancer targets and diagnostic targets, and so we have still got that common set of objectives. How we get there is really tough, but I do think having that compassionate leadership from all COOs, DOFs, chief execs is what keeps us going. So in those really tough operating planning meetings with our with ICBs, with providers, with the national regional teams, as tough as those meetings are, we all want the same things. And I think that's what makes you go away and go, yeah, actually that was tough, but I know what they're saying and I know we need to do this. And you regroup, don't you? You regroup around those common objectives because you all share those same values and you're all compassionate leaders. So yeah, it's tough, but I do think they're the ones that compassion is what drives you on and helps you through.
Brilliant, thanks, Virginia.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. So I think, as Sarah said, you have to make tough decisions in all roles, actually, not just as CFOs. And from my point of view, I'm really bad at saying no. I hate it in work, in personal life. If anyone ever asks for a volunteer for something, I'll always crack first because I can't stand the silence and I can't. And that is not great. That's back to attributes of a CFO. It's not great for a CFO because I have to say no quite a lot. And so I think it's balancing that need to say no to things with compassion actually really helps me give that message, because I find it hard to relay that message. And I think as Sarah, adding to what Sarah said, giving the reasons why and to that helps, I think, get people on board with it, because actually if you just go around saying no, we can't afford it, it's not really we can't afford a lot of things. So how you know, try and explain that in a bit more, why we need to do that, I think helps get people on board and helps them deliver it. And I guess going back to what Sarah was saying about the COVID pandemic, and I know we've talked about the COVID pandemic quite a lot, but you're completely right, Sarah. I think the whole feeling of we're all on one team was the bit that, while everything was horrible, it felt really nice to all be on the same team. And whoever was on site, because so many people went off sick, you know, whoever was there that day, that was your team for the day, and you had to get on with it and run the hospital. And I think that feeling of being on the same page and on the same team, we've got to try and keep when times are tough in a different way, and they're tough in a financial way at the moment, as you said. And there are difficult messages. We're going to have to say no to things. We're going to have to, as a group of finance professionals, deliver difficult messages to our organisations, to our systems, to our regions. Having that compassion and understanding of what the priorities are and understanding of patient needs is really important, and will help get people on board with what we have to deliver, I think, anyway.
Brilliant, thank you. So let me bring Louise's question in. So Louise has asked us in the chat, do you think it's too late to become a first-time director of finance after 50? And I think, Louise, the kind of driver to this is some comments some of your colleagues have made. Do you want to come in and embellish that?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. It stemmed from looking at our skills development network census and the breakdown of our staff, and we talk a lot about gender and other protected characteristics when we talk about EDI, but age doesn't often get mentioned, and it's really noticeable that the changes as we go through the career, which you'd absolutely expect. But it did get me thinking around the director roles, and 60% of our directors are between the ages of 45 and 55, which you'd expect and wasn't a surprise. But I'm fast approaching 50. And we were having a conversation about first-time DOF roles, and I got some really strong views from people around, well, surely once you hit 50, you should be winding down. Why on earth would you want to be a first-time DOF in particular once you've got to that particular age? And I just wondered what your views were on that.
As the senior on the screen, can I go first? So look, so 50 is the new 40, isn't it, or even the new 30? Age shouldn't even come into it, Louise. And actually, you know, when you think about, sorry to hark back to children, Virginia, but you know, when you think about the pause we sometimes have to make for childcare or family commitments, you know, it is a brilliant time to be in 50, isn't it? Because actually, if you did have your children in your 30s, your kids are off your hands, and actually you've got much more time to think about you and your career development. And I think it's there's a huge workforce out there that we are not using to their full potential. So it is not a time for winding down. It's a time for developing yourself, going for it, and expanding your horizons. So 100% no from me.
Excellent, that's good to hear.
And I'm shocked that anyone says that to you. So I just think, well, it might be the case. Some people might be that they want to wind down, but that's surely the whole point of all of this, is that we're all individual, and actually what's right for you isn't right for someone else. So don't impose your views on other people. Would be the other bit, I'd say. Anyone can be whatever they like, whatever age they want to be, if they choose to do so.
Thanks,
yeah, and I do think that's something we need to do as leaders to encourage. Yeah, someone's put in the chat about, we wouldn't say that to a 50-year-old man, would you? But I do think there's something we need to do to encourage women that are, you know, whose children are leaving school or are beyond sort of time when we need to be at home for them, to think about how we develop them and get them to think about their career development, because it's not, it is not a time to wind down, unless you want to, of course.
With that in mind, perhaps we should think about resilience and career resilience as well. I think we've had some webinars on that, because if the retirement age is 67, as Julie pointed out, you've got a long time to go, Sarah.
Absolutely.
A long career to fulfill. So no, thanks for that. But you know, I think you make a really good point actually, and we have had a webinar previously on the menopause as well, and some of the issues that many women face around this time and how that can impact one's performance at work or how they feel about the performance at work. So there's quite a lot of things to think about there as well. But that's why I popped that in the chat about, would someone say that to a 50-year-old man? Because I think there's also quite a lot of negative perceptions around females as we age. So I was going to pick up again on what you said earlier. No, in fact, I'll go in a slightly different direction. Whilst we were talking about feelings and making tough business decisions, what is your view on how appropriate it is to share emotion at work, particularly in a senior leadership role? If we could start with you, Sarah, because I think we had quite a good chat about that in our briefing, didn't we?
Yeah, so I think it's changed quite a lot over the last 20 odd years since I've been in the NHS. So I think it was or certainly felt from my point of view that you shouldn't show emotions at work, particularly in finance, you know, for whatever reasons, but that was my perception. And then you know, these jobs are tough, aren't they? And we, as we were saying just now, we do it because we care passionately about services that we are providing, and it does become emotional. And sometimes, you know, the strain and stress of work does get to you. And you know, I'm not afraid of sharing the fact that, you know, there are days when you just sit at your desk, head in hand, and shed the odd tear, either out of frustration or just pure emotion as to what you're having to deal with. And over the years, people have been really supportive of showing that emotion and actually said, gosh, I'm really glad somebody is showing those emotions. Do not ever hide it. Because it makes you more human. It makes you more human. You know, it makes you more approachable, more relatable. People actually see you for the rounded human being you are, and not just a finance person who says no. It was a medical director a few years ago in my previous role that said, don't, you know, I was apologising to her for having a little bit of a snivel on my desk, and she said, never change who you are, show those vulnerabilities. It absolutely makes you who you are. Yeah, so I think you shouldn't be afraid to show your emotions at work is my view. And anyone that sort of says, you know, get a grip, woman, or anything like that, just needs to be told that actually your emotions make you who you are, your vulnerabilities make you a better leader. You know, people that don't show those emotions, I think, are hiding them.
What do you think, Virginia?
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Sarah, and I think it shows that you're human. I mean, we're not robots. You know, you have good days and you have bad days, and you have a day when something else is going on that's nothing to do with work but is on your mind and makes you stressed at work or upset at work or whatever it might be, and that's normal. And everyone feels those things, even people that don't appear to or hide it better, or not hide it better, because you shouldn't have to hide it. I think one of the things that and it also puts people at ease, because if they realize you're a normal person or a human being, then they feel more able to communicate with you or talk to you. One of the things that I'd reflect on is when I was first, so I mentioned I was acting up at the beginning of my CFO role. I went to a meeting. I won't say who it was in case I don't want to embarrass them, but I went to a meeting, and it was a woman leading this meeting, and it was quite a big meeting, and I'd only just met her as my first. It was almost one of my first meetings in acting CFO, and it was just before the meeting started, and she came over and introduced herself to me, and so, you know, very shy, I know, blah, blah, blah. And she said, oh, I hate these meetings. I find these really intimidating, chairing these meetings in front of all these people. I literally just met her, and find them really intimidating. I can't wait till we get into this until the meeting's over. And I can't tell you how much that put me at ease, because she was, you know, it's really impressive lady, female CFO, you know, seemed so confident in front of all these people. And to just say that, you know, a couple of words to me before the meeting put me so at ease, because I was like, well, if she's nervous, then I'm okay to feel nervous at this meeting. And actually, she seems nervous, but then she's got up and done the meeting, and it's all fine, obviously. But it really put me at ease, and it's really made me think, she's a normal person, but actually she's a normal person that is very good at her job. And I think sharing those little nuggets with people, especially because she obviously saw I was nervous and just was trying to put me at ease, was so kind, and just made me really respect her even more.
Thanks for that. I think that's really important, isn't it? And the impact that that had on you, and how that's encouraged you in your career. Hopefully with, you know, with this webinar just now, there might be people on who are watching who are taking inspiration from both of you, and how you show your vulnerability and share your emotion. So yeah, with that in mind, if you were doing it again, so if you were going back in your career, and I think you and I had this chat, Sarah, how you probably wouldn't have masked your personality or tried to act in a certain way quite as much. But if you were starting it again, what would you have done differently around your, you know, your sort of personality, your style, your approach?
I would, it's easy to say, isn't it, looking back, about confidence, but I would tell my younger self to be more confident in my abilities, and I would say take more time. So pace yourselves. There's no rush. You know, there are so many opportunities, and you know, no one is going to say the door is closing after a certain age. So I would take more time, make sure you get the work-life balance better. And those of us that have got kids, you know, just enjoy that time with them. I remember on my first maternity leave, feeling really pressured to come back to it, not by anybody else, but by myself, because I didn't want the men, and they tend to be men in the office, to think that I was slacking and you know, not pulling my weight. So I felt really pressured to come back after my first child. And then when I got pregnant again, I was dreading telling my boss, because I was so worried about what, and it was a female at the time, what she'd think about me going on another lot of maternity leave. And I should have been in the most happy place in my life, you know, about to have another child, and I just felt guilty. And that guilt, you know, those mums that are on the call, you know, that guilt stays with you forever, doesn't it? I'm guilty about dropping them off, guilty about not being at work when you should be at work. So I would, if I could do it again, I would just say, ditch that guilt. You've got nothing to be guilty about. It's, you know, what being a mother, a father, makes you who you are, and makes you probably a better leader, and able to carry out your duties. So take your time, pace yourself, and be confident in your ability to deliver. You do not have to be in the office 60 hours a week.
Thank you. That's a really good answer, and some brilliant advice there. Someone was actually applauding, using the applause one. Virginia, what about you? If you were doing things again, what would you do differently? What would you tell your younger self?
Gosh, I don't think I can compete with Sarah, but I think not that it's a competition, obviously. I think the main thing I would tell myself is not to put my my own barriers in the way of things. You know, I said quite a bit that I didn't want to do this job. That was all in my own head, and I felt like that every time I've progressed, that I couldn't do the next job up until I was doing it, and that's all. That's not anything that anyone else has said to me. That's all confidence and self-imposed. It's a real shame, because I didn't spend so much time worrying about how I was going to do it. could have done it with, you know, I would have probably, not that I needed to progress any sooner, but I just would have done it with a lot less stress. And, you know, my advice I give to people is always, you don't feel like you don't need to know everything in that job to be able to do the job. You've got, especially as you get more senior, you've got a team of people that hopefully know what they're doing and will support you. And so, you know, and you're never going to do it. As if you try and get all the experience that you ever need to do a job, but then you probably already, you already should have been doing that job because you already learned it all. So for me, it's, yeah, self-imposed barriers, which is a lot about confidence, is in a similar vein to Sarah. You know, you spend a lot of time doing your job, so try and enjoy it, and enjoy the time you've got there rather than worrying about so many things, because actually if you worry so much, you'll miss actually the good bits about it. And we're all here for a reason, hopefully because you enjoy your jobs and you enjoy working in the NHS and finance. So actually take some joy from that, because it is a great job.
Thank you. So I'll ask you one more question just before I hand you back over to Zoe, who I know will want to do a bit of a summary. I think we have seen some difference in the makeup of CFOs over the last sort of 15, 20 years. And certainly I think there are more, well, I know for a fact there are more female CFOs and senior female leaders around now than there were previously. However, what more would you both like to see around CFOs, or perhaps how individuals choose to lead?
Shall I go first? I was hoping to buy time to think of a better answer. So as you say, Nicola, we've definitely done a lot of work and changed the face of finance leadership a bit, but there's so much more to do. And I think even just some of the comments that have come out about, age or gender or race. Well, I mean, we're definitely still very white in CFO, in the makeup of CFOs. There is a lot to do in terms of the makeup of a CFO group, and still a long way to go to be representative of the population. And I think to the point that Sarah made, even though some of the makeup has changed, actually the annual conference and there's still as you said, the networking and the kind of everyone being in the bar, I think that kind of attitude has to change, and where we do our networking, where we do our business, and trying to still stand up to that kind of tradition of that way of being. Is, sorry, I'm not making a lot of sense, but yeah, trying to still challenge that. And I think while we've made a lot of progress, there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I just wanted to add something in that I've been reading about lately, and that's about how we look, and some work has been done about females in sport that talk about females act at the same time as being aware of how we look while we're acting. And I think that's so true, isn't it? And I just think we need to do more to combat that. So, that isn't applicable to our male colleagues all the time. And I know I've been conscious of it throughout my career. So there's something about, breaking that down and worrying more about what we're doing, not what we look like while we're doing it. And that might be another webinar for another evening, Zoe, but just wanted to put that out there. But I agree with you, Virginia.
Brilliant, thank you. And actually, just on that point, it's much more difficult, isn't it, when we're on Teams meetings all the time? You can always see yourself in the bottom right-hand corner all the time as well. Brilliant, thank you very much. It's amazing how quickly the hour goes. I kind of mentioned at the beginning, and then suddenly we're at the end of our session today. So before I attempt to summarise, just really to say that I've massively enjoyed our discussion. So we've covered a lot of things, and I will try and pick out some of the main areas, but obviously won't cover it all. I think we started with the question about CFO attributes, and we started with, I think the top 3 that we had were integrity, being approachable, and openness. And I think as we've talked through, and you've both talked through your experience and answered the questions that us and the, Nicola and I and the network have posed to you, you've really brought out the importance of each of those attributes. And we started with kind of your view on what you thought before you got into CFO position, what the role model looked like at that point, kind of stern, serious, male, white, all of those things. And I think we've really worked through and broken down the benefits of compassionate leadership, the benefits that brings with it, and the benefits of not fitting that mold that we might have seen some years ago. So, and we had some great examples of that, and how you've had individuals in your careers who have been role models, so you've been able to take working with them and the benefits from that, which has been incredibly helpful. We've also talked a lot about the lessons learned, and you've given some great advice. So not putting work first all the time and making sure we get that work-life balance. And we've picked up, as part of our survey results and a part of what we've talked about today, that real difficulty in the things that we want to do outside of work and trying to balance that out with our careers. But also I was really interested in, because one of the questions I was going to ask was about barriers in your career, and I was really interested in particularly both of your comments about confidence, but that kind of balance of in barriers in our careers, is it internal barriers that are greater than the external barriers that we've got? And I think that's probably come through quite clearly in the discussion today. Yeah, as I said, also some brilliant advice, and I think the vulnerability makes you a better leader is something I'm definitely going to take away from that. And I will just leave the sum up with, I think, Sarah, quote from you, so be more confident and be more courageous as attributes in terms of getting into the position and being successful in a chief financial officer role. Brilliant. So some proper thank yous. We've just hit 6 o'clock. So firstly, a huge thank you, Sarah, Virginia, for your time, for your openness, your transparency, and for talking to us today. It was brilliant, so thank you very much. Nicola, thank you to you as ever for being my co-host, and for all of the organisation that you've put in behind the scenes today. And lastly, but by no means leastly, a huge thank you to all of you as part of our network. So for your attendance, your engagement, your brilliant questions. As ever, your feedback is really important. So we have the survey feedback, but please do supplement that. Nicola and I always want to hear from you. And we've got the network now in the LinkedIn group. So please do use all of those fora to be able to feedback. We are currently organising our next webinar, and we will take some of the feedback from that we've had today, and Sarah, your steer on what we might want to discuss as well as part of that, and get back to you with the date on that, and also any details around our in-person event. So that brings us to the end of our formal part of the session. Nicola and I will stay on for 15 minutes or so, and Virginia and Sarah, you're welcome to join us if you've got time. If anyone would like to stay on and have a bit more of an informal discussion. If not, then we will see you next time. But thank you very much, and really great to see you today.
Thank you.